What's going on, everyone? Steven here from TechMaker.tv. In this episode, we're kicking off a new type of series, and essentially what I want to start doing, and I may do this every week, every other week, I'm not 100% sure, but we're going to be doing an hour of Ruby, and essentially it's just Ruby, it's not Rails, it's pure Ruby, and I want to start building out some projects from scratch that are just kind of mini projects and exercises that do something that's really interesting and teaches you Ruby. So this should be suitable for you if you don't know Ruby at all, or if you're transitioning from another language or whatever. If you're totally brand new to programming, this might not be the best place to start, meaning, there's plenty of episodes from other channels that go through, what is a for loop, what is the different types of data, and this sort of thing. So we won't be doing as much of that here, but it should be pretty beginner friendly. So with all of that said, what are we going to be doing? So the big thing that we're going to do in this video is there's a data set from Streeteasy, which is an app that does rentals and sales of apartments in New York City. And I found it on Codecademy's GitHub. And inside of that data set, I wrote some code, and we're going to go and be able to do some querying and check the average rent. So let me just give you an example. So here I've got this object rentals, which has all of this data about rentals, and we can query and say rentals.where, and then we can actually just say like neighborhood right here, for example, and it's Tribeca, and we could do something like I don't know, bathrooms, or let's do bedrooms actually. Bedrooms is 2. And we can grab the average rent off of that, and we can see that the average rent in Tribeca in New York City is $9,840. And we can also query for other things like borough. So we can be like borough is Brooklyn and get the average rent there. So it's much cheaper to live in Brooklyn than Tribeca. So I'm going to show you how to parse the data and how to basically build out all this querying and all this kind of stuff from scratch. And that's going to be the second part of the video. The first part of the video, we're actually going to build out a simple compound interest calculator. And I'll give you a quick demo of how that works. So we've got, all right, sorry, I'm just getting all this up and clean. So we can do Ruby main.rb. And it's going to start asking me questions. So it's collecting user input. So what's your current balance? $100,000. We want to get a 8% interest rate. Let's do yearly compounding. And how many years? 30. And it's going to tell us that we're going to have $1,006,265. So it's pretty straightforward, but it's a good exercise if you're new to Ruby, just to kind of get your head around some of the basic concepts. So I thought we would start there. I think that probably takes about 10 or 15 minutes to get through, and then the rest of the video is dedicated more toward the data analytics, if I can say that, related to the apartments and stuff in New York. So, and it's kind of a overstatement to call it analytics, so you have to bear with me, but calculating the average rent and just getting set up to probably do some analytics. I'm thinking I might actually do another episode soon that goes more into actual analytics, so that could be kind of fun. All of that said, if you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. But let's jump in and get started. To get started with our first project, we need to make sure that you have Ruby installed. So as I said earlier, we're not going to go through the actual installation here. You'll have to look that up for your specific machine, but once you have it installed, you should be able to do ruby-v in the terminal and get some kind of version approximately 2.6 or 7 or something like that. Presumably if you're running like 2.8 or something like that in the future, everything should work fine. If it's really in the future, we're on like Ruby 3 or something, who knows. But in any case, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to make a new directory here, and we're going to create a compound interest calculator, just a simple compound interest calculator. So we'll call this compound, and we'll cd down into compound, and I'm going to go ahead and open this file up, or this folder up rather. So I'm using Atom here. You can use any text editor that you want, obviously. I'm assuming that you have just enough programming experience, or at least enough experience to have like a good text editor installed, so I assume you probably already have a preference. Let's start by just making sure that we know how to run Ruby files. So, like I said earlier, I'm definitely making some assumptions related to you having some basic programming knowledge, like basics, like loops, different types of data structures and data types, and so on and so forth, but not really anything specific to Ruby. So hopefully we're all on the same page. So just inside of this new directory I created called compound, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call it main.rb. You can literally call this anything that you want, so there's nothing special about calling it main. So what I'm going to write inside of here is puts hello world for our classic starter file here, and we'll say ruby main.rb, and you'll see that we get hello world printed out. So let's move on to something more more interesting and get some user input. So if we want, we can add, let's add another puts here, and we'll say what's on your mind, and then we'll do let's just say status equals gets, and then we'll just say puts status. Okay, so well, let's actually jazz this up a little bit. So let's do string interpolation here. So we can say you said, like this. And so basically what this is how string interpolation looks in Ruby. It means basically we have some text in a variable and we want to parse that into some other text. So let's run this again. Ruby main.rb, and we're going to get what's on your mind, and we'll say not too much, and then we get that printed back out to us. So now we know how to get user input. So this is gets is for get string, I believe. So it's actually asking, it's a command line sort of thing, and it's asking the user for input. Okay, so let's build on this and let's build out our little calculator. So I'm going to switch over to another window here where I have the formula for compound interest. So A is our final amount, P is the initial principal balance, R is our expected interest rate, and then we're assuming that the period is a year, I think, in our context, but it's the number of times interest applied per time period and the number of time periods elapsed. So if we assume that those are a year, then we can say the number of years and then the number of times applied per year. So if it's yearly, that's going to be a 1. If it's monthly, that's going to be a 12, so on and so forth. I've also got a compound interest calculator pulled up from investor.gov so we can check our math, make sure we're doing the math right, as long as we assume that they did the math right, which let's hope they did. But let's go ahead and go over here and get this going. Actually, sorry for jumping around so much. So I'm just going to write down on a piece of paper real quick what the variables mean. So we've got principal balance, we've got interest rate, we've got number of times applied, and we've got number of periods. Number of time periods. Okay, so let's go back over and let's basically write out some questions in here. So first thing we're going to do is say puts what is your starting balance, like this. So I want to work on the interface here just a tiny bit. So puts will put us on a new line, but I actually want to then add like print. So print will not put a new line. So I want to like basically have like a little command prompt area for the person to write the answer, and then we'll say P equals gets, and then let's just puts out P so that we make sure all this is working. So let's do Ruby main.rb. What is your starting balance? And we get that printed back out to us. So okay, we want to essentially replicate this exact process for each one of the variables that we need, right? So the variables were the principal, starting balance, the interest rate, and let's kind of humanize this a little bit. So we'll say what interest rate do you expect to get, and then instead of P, let's do I. Then this was a little bit more of a technical question that somebody may or may not know the answer to, but we can say like, well, we'll just assume that they know what they're doing a little bit. So we'll say, how many times will your investment be compounded per year? Something like that. And then we'll make this N. And then let's see. So then finally we've got the number of periods. So how many years will you leave your investment? Something like that. Or how many years will you keep your money invested? So just trying to make this kind of read decently well, and then we'll make that T. So let's just quickly double check that formula, and it's P1 plus R over N to the NT. So they have R where I have I, so let me actually switch that, even though I just realized this is nice because it tells pint, but that's neither here nor there. So we have PRNT. Okay, so now we'll be collecting all the data. So for the formula, we basically want to just say, let's say result equals, and then we can just actually plug this in. So we can say P times 1 plus, and then in here we can say R divided by N, and then we need to raise all of this. So double asterisks will raise something to the power of, where just one asterisk does multiplication. And then we'll say N times T. And then we'll say puts, you will have $, and then interpolate, and then result. And then let's actually go ahead and round that to 2 decimal places. Okay, so let's plug some stuff in and see what happens here. So what's your starting balance? Let's put $100,000. We want to get a good 8% interest rate. How many times? Let's say 1 time per year, so yearly. And how many years will you keep your money invested? Let's say 30. And we get an undefined method divide for string. Okay, so this actually makes perfect sense. So what we need to do is over here, what I forgot to do, each one of these we're asking for a number. So let's convert all of these to floating point numbers with .2f because it receives them as strings, which is why when it says get s, it's get string. So we'll run this all again. So $100,000. We expect to get 0.08 interest rate. We want to get compounded 1 time per year, and I plan to leave it for 30 years. And this is saying that we'll have $1,006,265. So let's go try that over on investor.gov and see if that comes out the same. So what do we say? We're going to do $100,000. That looks like 10,000. We're going to leave the monthly contribution thing alone. The length of time is going to be 30. The estimated interest rate, I think they're not looking for a decimal here. I think they're actually looking for like a number 8. And then compound frequency will be annually. So let's calculate this. And so we get 1,006,265.69. And that's exactly what we got. So I think we basically have this wrapped up. But I want to change this a little bit so that we can make it more reusable. So this is going to introduce us to a couple of new concepts. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new file. And I'm going to call this calculator.rb. And what I'm going to do is over in my main, I'm going to require calculator. And just to be sure, let's come over here and let's actually do puts in the calculator. And then let's run ruby main.rb. And you can see here the first thing that happens is that we're in the calculator. So I'm just going to Control C to go ahead and get out of all of that. So we basically proven that we have our calculator being brought in. So the next thing that we're going to do is introduce the idea of a class. And as I've said at the beginning, I'm thinking you probably have a little bit of experience with programming and at least have followed some other tutorials or something. So I'm hoping this isn't completely foreign, because I'm not going to go into a super in-depth explanation of object orientation or anything like that here. But suffice it to say that we can create some reusable code by creating a class here. So I'm going to create a class called calculator. And I think I have some other videos that do explain classes and so on, so I'll link to that down in the description if I can find it. But what I want to do is a class, if we want to create an instance of a class, like that's an individual object that has all of the methods that we're defining right here, the first thing we need to do is define an initialize method. And initialize basically takes some arguments. In our case, what I'm going to do is take in that PRNT, but I'm going to give it better names here. And to make sure that we can see it all, I'm going to go ahead and drag this out. So I'm going to say we're going to take in a principal. We're going to take in an interest rate. What else do we got? Number times per period, and actually I'm going to change that to num so we have a little more space, and then num periods, like that. And now we need to assign each of these to instance variables. So we can do that in Ruby by saying at principal equals principal, and this will let us access this instance variable throughout the class. So at interest rate equals interest rate, at num, I don't like this next variable name, num times per period equals num times per period, and num periods equals num periods. So this, if we want to make it more clear, needs to be number of compounds per period. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want this to be more readable than just like a mathematical formula. So if we want to, if you're coming from another programming language, a lot of times you'll have to define getters and setters. So you might write a method like def principal, and then in here you would return principal. And you may actually have to explicitly return principal. Now this is perfectly valid, but in Ruby the last line of a method is always return, so we don't need return. And actually, there's this handy thing we can do in Ruby where we say attr reader. So this is going to define a getter. So we'll say attribute reader principal, and this is identical to saying exactly this here. So we don't need that if we write this attr reader up here, and we can actually chain a bunch of these in. So we can say interest rate, number num compounds per period, and num periods, like that. So now this is actually going to be, I'm just looking at this going, wow, this is actually going to be pretty annoying the way that I did it, but we'll stick with it for now. So what we need to do is copy this function. It's not even really a function, it's just some inline math. And we're going to put it inside of another method, and I'm just going to call it result. And let's paste this here and comment it out for a second. So what is this? We have the principal times, and then we'll have 1 plus r, which is the interest rate, divided by what is that, number of compounds, num compounds per period, and then we're going to have raised to the power of number of compounds per period times num periods. So I did all of this for readability purposes, but actually it's kind of hard to read still, just because there's so much of it. So we could split it up somehow, but tell you the truth, I'm not going to worry about it too much. And one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pass all of the 2f's over to the class here, so that we don't have to worry about it on the interface side. So we can come over here and take away all these two F's. And you'll see how this fits together in just a second if you're confused for any reason. Okay, so now what we can do is say result equals calculator.new, and then we're going to give it the prnt.result. Right? Let me just see. prnt, so the number of periods being the t in that case. I don't know, maybe the just single variables are better, and we could add comments like, you know, explaining what each one is. That might be actually easier to read than what we've got going on here. We could even do p equals principal and so on and so forth and sort of back into it that way. I don't know. Let's just kind of run through this and make sure that it's working, and maybe we'll be done with it, honestly. It's not a big deal to make it perfect in my opinion right now. So 100,000 is my starting balance. Interest rate 0.08. It's going to compound once per year, and I'm going to leave it 30 years still. And we get the same answer. Okay, so let's take a look over here. I just want to say a couple of things about this and why this is a valuable way to do this. So putting this in a class like this means that, you know, we have this running right now on this terminal application, but we could take this little bit of code and use it like in a web app or an app or wherever you want. So this, now that we've encapsulated this in a class, we can take that and do other things with it. And then here, this is really just an interface, that's all. So in actual fact, like what we're trying to do is remove business logic from the front end and move it to the back end, so to speak. So for example, this round 2 here could also go, if we wrap all of this in some parentheses, put that round 2 on there, and that's it. So what's great about that, or what's useful about that, is now this thing doesn't need to do any sort of math conversions or formatting or anything. It just gives the information over to the calculator in a format that it expects, and then it gets back a result. So over here, we're going ahead and making all of the conversions to the right type of data, and we're rounding it and all of that stuff here. So if we use this on a web, you know, a web app or something, I mean, this is a really trivial example, but hopefully you get the idea. So now this thing can be used in multiple places, and this is really just sort of the user interaction bit. So it's been maybe like 15 to 20 minutes, and we've built a really simple but first program that's actually kind of useful. So that's kind of nice. Let's go ahead and close this down, and let's do some kind of example work in the terminal again here. So I'm going to open up something called IRB for just a second, and I want to kind of play around and show you. So I think IRB is Interactive Ruby, is what that stands for. So once you have Ruby installed, you also have IRB installed. So once you're in IRB, you can basically type in you know, any kind of basic code, and it's going to work. We can define classes, and then we have this, like, we'll define a squirrel class and so on and so forth. So I want to work through a few examples that we need to do, or we need to go through, so that you'll have the ability to understand our next little micro project, which is going to be the data analysis of the rentals in New York City. So I'm going to open up IRB again. I just closed it and cleared everything. And I want to look at a couple of ways that we can loop through data and parse data, essentially. So if you're coming from another language, you're bound to be familiar with arrays, or potentially they're called lists. And maybe I think it's a list in Python. And we also have hashes, which I don't know what that's called in Python off the top of my head, maybe. But anyway, so we have arrays and we have hashes, which an array is just a sorted collection of objects, and it could be any kind of object. It could be numbers, it could be strings, it could be hash, it could be anything. You could actually have like object.new in here, all sorts of things. So anything that's an object, you can put it in an array. And then a hash is like a key value data structure. So what we can do is say something like A is hello, and then B is 567, and so on and so forth. And so you get this kind of data structure like this. So arrays, let me cycle up. So we'll store this as array. You can always grab the last return thing in IRB with an underscore. So you can say array equals underscore here. And then this will say hash equals underscore. So you can access array elements the same way you do in a lot of other languages. So you can say like array 0. You can do array -1 to get the last one. Hashes, you can get it with the key. You can use symbols or strings as hash keys. So a symbol being this colon letter syntax or what have you. You'll see a lot of people using symbols, kind of what I like personally, visually. Okay, so before we keep going into our example, the one thing I wanted to talk about was iteration. So we have this array, right? And we can actually loop through this by using this method called each, and it looks something like this. We'll say array.each, and what happens when we call .each is we're going to get back this enumerator. And what this is going to allow us to do is kind of step bit by bit through each item in the array and then do something. So we can say something like this. We can say array.each do item, and then we can like put item, and you can see here that we get each item individually listed out like that. So let's imagine that we wanted to do something like really straightforward, like okay, let's have another array like that, and we'll just say numbers equals that array. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now imagine we want to generate another array called doubles, for example. So what we could do is say like doubles equals an empty array, and then we want to double each one of the numbers in the previous array and put them in this new array doubles. So it's really not that hard. We can say numbers.each do number, and then we can say doubles, and then this double back arrow allows us to basically push things into arrays. So we could say number times 2, and then end, and then let's check what's in doubles now. So now we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 inside of doubles. Well, my computer just crashed, so that was awesome. So I lost my place there, but we were talking about arrays and we were doing some doubling of numbers. So in the last little bit, I think we did basically just with the regular each. So what I wanted to show you is how you could do, so let's recreate what we had. I think we had something like numbers equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we could do, instead of going through the whole thing and setting up a doubles array and then looping through and pushing stuff into it, what we can do is essentially a one-liner where we can say doubles equals numbers.map, and then in here we can say number and then number times 2, and we'll get the same thing. So you may notice that I did this instead of do end, so you could actually do the exact same thing with the do end syntax just to make sure that it's clear. So that's exactly the same thing. It's just whether you want it on one line or not. You can use curly braces or you can use a do end. Those are sort of equivalent. And I think you can actually do this. So it's sort of a style thing. I think it's more normal to see like do end if you have more than one short little line, but in any case, so let's talk about what exactly is going on here. So when we loop through with each, so if we just do numbers dot each and then we like do n times 2, so you can see what happens here is we just get back the original array. So what each does is it just loops through the set and basically does whatever you tell it to do, but the line, it doesn't modify anything, it doesn't return anything other than the original array. If we want to get back a different data set, we can use things like map, or we could even use things like, we could do something like find all, and then we can do n is greater than 2, and then we're going to get back a subset. And so if we were to set like, we could set that equal to a variable actually. So if you set, let's actually try this. So if we just set new numbers equals, and then if we copy this dot each, this is going to trip some people up because they're going to expect that to equal, you know, the doubled array. But this is actually just the original array because that's how it gets returned. So iteration in Ruby is kind of a big topic, and it's all powered by this module called Enumerable. So let me show you what I mean. So if we look at the array, and then we call .class, and then we call .ancestors, you'll see here that we have array, which is the class itself, and then we have enumerable, object, kernel, and basic object. So we can actually check for the same thing on the hash, and you'll see that we have hash, enumerable, so on and so forth. So what enumerable is, let's actually go over to the browser and take a look at it. Ruby enumerable. So enumerable has a whole bunch of methods in it, but like we were just looking at map here, we were looking at find all. I'm not going to go through all of these obviously because we don't really need to for what we want to do, but this is actually quite a good thing to go and read through all of it and play around with all of it once you get past what we're doing here in this simple tutorial. Okay, so I've kind of been explaining my way around some of this iteration stuff, and there's one other thing that I want to look at before we actually get into our little project, which is we need to actually look at how do we create our own enumerable class. And what that means is I want to have a type of class that has all of the sort of power of enumerable built into it. And let me go back up. Let's make a new directory called enumerable demo. And this one isn't really part of a project thing that I want to do, but I just want to kind of work out how we're going to do something when we do our data analysis stuff. So essentially let's kind of just create a new class in here, and we'll play around with it a tiny bit in the terminal after. So I'm just going to call this dogs.rb, and inside of here I'm going to define two classes. So the typical thing you can do in Ruby, or the thing you'll see, is one class is defined in a file, but there's no rule saying you have to do that. So sometimes when I'm just playing around, I'll define multiple classes. So we can have something like class dog. We'll quickly stick everything in here that we needed, that we talked about earlier. So let's give it a name and a breed. I want to say at name equals name, at breed equals breed, and then we'll do an attr reader for name and breed. So that's all I want there. And then down here we're going to define a new class called dogs, so like a collection of dogs. And we're going to put an initialize in here with no arguments. You could give it arguments obviously, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to say at dogs equals an array, and it's going to be dog.new. Let's give it a name of Fred and a breed of husky. Let's do like 4 dogs maybe. Need some commas here. Let's give this a name of Stella. She's also a husky. Sam is a lab. And let's see here. What else do we want? Amy is a Dalmatian, maybe, if I spelled that right. Okay, so if we want to make this class supercharged with the enumerable methods, what we can do is include enumerable, and that's the first part. The second part, first of all, let me also attr reader my dogs here so that we have that getter. dogs. Okay. Then what we need to do is define an each method. And so this is how you basically make an enumerable class, like make your own type of collection. So this is all that's required. So we have to define an each method. And if you go look at the array documentation, you can see that it defines an each method. So basically it includes enumerable and defines an each method, and it does exactly what we're doing here. So that's it. So there may be more going on in array, but in any case. So we have each here, and what I'm going to do is say dogs.each do, let's just do like this. So in this case, like dogs is an array, so it has an each method, and what we're trying to do is basically pass along any calls into the dogs. So let's say dog, and then we'll just say yield dog, and that's basically it. So now over here, and before we do that, actually let's define a couple of convenience methods here. So we'll say husky question mark, and then we'll just say breed is a husky, and let's define another one for lab, and we'll say breed is a lab, and then Dalmatian. Same deal. Breed is Dalmatian, and I need to downcase all of these. I was gonna fix the capitalization, but somehow that's less easy than downcasing everything. I don't know, whatever. Okay, so let's go back into IRB and let's require dogs.rb, and now we should have dog and we should have dogs. Okay, so let's create a new set of dogs, dogs.new, and you can see we get all of our data in there. So now if we do dogs.find all, and then we can do dog, and then dog is a husky, you can see that we get our two dogs that are huskies. Okay, so the last little thing I want to say here is there's actually kind of a cool little syntactic sugar where whenever you have like a single method call like this, in Ruby you can do this. You can say dogs.find all and colon husky question mark, and it's the exact same thing. So this is basically, in this context where you're just calling a single method on the dog, you can abbreviate it like this. So this is really nice. Okay, cool. So that gets us to basically, I don't know if I've done the best job covering all of this stuff, but we needed to take a brief look at all of this before we get into our example with the New York City rentals. But let's go ahead and dive into that. So Streeteasy is an app, if you're not familiar, in New York City for finding property to rent or buy. And it looks like Codecademy actually got a really cool data set from them a couple years back with a bunch of rental prices and so on and so forth. So I want to download this data, and I'll put a link down in the description. You can also see it up here. It's Codecademy/datasets, and maybe there's other ones, but I just looked at this, Tree Master Streeteasy. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to download, I want the whole thing, so I don't want the split of Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens. I want the whole thing, and it may take a second to open up, but I'm going to download this into my project directory. And actually what I want to do, I'm just going to go to raw right here. I'm going to copy, I'm going to do Command A, copy it, Command C. I'm going to come back over here. Let's quit out of all this. I'm going to cd up. I'm going to make a new directory called rentals. And we'll cd down into rentals. I'm going to close this. And I'm going to open up rentals. Once rentals gets open, I'm going to let's go ahead and create a new file, and I'm just going to call it data.csv. and I'm just going to paste all of that in and save it. Looks like we've got 5,000 rows, so that's cool. And then let's create a new, well actually, you know what, let's clear out of here, IRB, let's require CSV just to make sure this is working correctly. Then we'll do csv.read, I can't type, data.csv, and let's see what we get. Okay, cool. So normally when you're looking at a CSV, so let me set data equals underscore. So normally the first row is the column headers, data 0. So I'm going to copy all of this, and let's go create a new class actually. So I'm going to create a new file in here, and I'm going to call it rental.rb, and we'll do class rental, and inside of here I'm going to do def initialize, and I'm going to paste all of that stuff. Now we need to get rid of all of the, you know what, actually I should be able to do quotes and then find all and then replace with blank, and then like that. So that's all of my arguments there, and that is a lot of arguments actually, but you know what, it's okay. I'm not gonna change it, I don't think. So then we need to actually copy all of this stuff, and we'll do adder reader and paste it all, and then I'm going to just kind of have to click through here obnoxiously and add colons. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video so you don't have to watch me do all of that, but we need to add colons in front of all of these. So in addition to all of that, the next thing you're going to need to do is actually set all these to instance variables. So I'm also not going to record myself saying at rental ID equals rental ID and so on and so forth a bajillion times. So I'm going to do a couple so you make sure you know what you're supposed to do. So it should be looking like this. So it should have at rent equals rent, and I'm going to like go ahead and again pause the video, but you need to take each one of these and set an instance variable. Okay, so in the end, you have a ton of attributes here, but this is what your file should basically look like. Now what I want to do over in data.csv, actually no, that's not right. What I want to do is I want to, well, let's quit out of this, and while I think about exactly what I want to do, let's go ahead and require rental.rb, and then let's run our csv.read. We need to require CSV. CSV is part of the Ruby standard library, so we don't have to like install anything or whatever. It's just one of the sort of built-in tools that you can use. So what I'm going to do is csv.read data equals that, and then let's do data. So we can cut a range. So I don't want the first one because that's those titles. So I don't want that one. I want everything from 1 to -1. So that's how you can declare a range of stuff. And let's do .count just to see how many there are. So that kind of makes sense. I want to do .each do d, and then I'm gonna say, you know what? That's not what I want to do. I'm going to do .map because I actually want to get the records back. What I want to do is say rental.new and then splat d, or asterisk d. Now what that does is it basically takes an array and turns it into an arguments list. So what we have in each one of these rows as it's coming through is just an array of stuff, and I actually need it in a format of arguments. So this will turn it into arguments for that initialize, and let's see what we get back. Okay, so now if we do rentals equals underscore, now we have an array of rentals. So let's take a look at the first one maybe and just have a look at it. So we have rental ID, building ID, the rent, number of bedrooms, so I guess it's a studio, bathrooms, square feet, so on and so forth. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do what we did with the dogs and so on, and I'm going to create a rentals class that has enumerable in it, and then we're going to use that class to start building out some stats and some ability to look at stats. So let's get that going. So let's pop back over to our code, and I'm going to add a new file in here, and it's going to be rentals.rb, and I'm going to do class rentals. I'm going to, well, I need to put ends down here. I'm going to go ahead and require the rental because we're going to need that object. And what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to require the rental, and I'm also going to require CSV, I think. Let's do initialize. You know what? I got to think about this for just a second. So I don't want to constantly reload the data. So here's what I was going to do. And I'm going to talk you through why I don't think it's a good idea. So what I could do is something like data equals csv.read and then do /data.csv. But I don't particularly care for that idea because I don't want to reload that data every time I create a new rentals object. So what I'm going to do in the short term is just stick this up here as a global variable. If you put a $sign in front, that becomes global. So what I can do now is say at rentals equals, and then we'll do data 1 -1 map do just like we did a minute ago. So .d, and then we'll say rental.new d, and we'll do the splat right here, and then we'll make a adder reader for rentals. Okay, so then just like we did in the last thing, we're going to do enumerable here. We're going to include enumerable, and then we need to define an each method, and we're going to do rentals.each do rental. Actually, I'm going to just put it on one line, each rental, and then we'll yield rental. If you want to read up more on what's going on here, there's a lot of great resources. I really liked the book Well-Grounded Rubyist. I think it's by David Black. I think that one is probably the best for explaining some of this stuff that I've read anyway, so definitely recommend that. But anyway, okay, so this basically looks like what we had earlier, right? So let's come back over here. Let's do the thing again. Let's require rentals.rb. Let's do rentals.new, and then we have rentals equals underscore. And now if we do rentals.count, so .count is actually something that comes from enumerable as well. So including enumerable lets us do .count, and it's going to pass that along to the actual list or the array of rentals that we have. We can do .rentals.find all where, and then what's something we could look at where, so we'll do rental. So I'm looking at the methods here. So we have like rental.floor equals 5. I just saw that. So let's count how many 5th floor rentals there are. There are 390 5th floor rentals. So that's all kind of cool. We can query all of that. So the next thing I want to do is actually build out some like slightly more advanced querying capability. Okay, so let's go back over to the code, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So we've got all these attributes on our rental, right? And then over here we've got this enumerable stuff. So we have all the like the find all and all that kind of nice enumerable querying ability, but I'd like to be able to chain things together. So let's write a new method, and I'm just going to call it like where, and then it's going to accept a condition hash. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say something like How can I do this? So just to get this working, let's look at that last example that we did. So I'm going to copy this. So find all. I'm going to just comment that out. So what I'd like to do is say rentals dot find all do, and I'm going to split this up because it's going to be a little bit more complicated. Find all do rental, and then rental dot send. So quick side tutorial here. So I don't know if I covered this earlier or not. I don't think I did, but in Ruby there's several ways you can call methods. So like if we do 1 plus 1, we get 2, which you would expect. But actually the plus is, so let's do 1.class, and you'll see that it's an integer. And then we can do 1.methods .sort, and you can see here at the top we've got there's a plus defined in here somewhere right there. So that's telling us that that is, and we can actually look at that too. So we could do 1.method, and I think we need to give it a, no, that's not what I'm looking for. You know what? Let's. How does this work? So, yeah. So I'm looking up this method here now, so you can see that the method itself is actually an object, and then we can check the class. We can check the. Let's check the methods on method. So methods sort. If you don't, this is sort of a meta lesson here, but introspection is a big deal in Ruby, where you can kind of just like go look around and see what's what. So I'm looking for owner. So we can look at the method plus and see that it's an owner, or see the owner is integer. So there's actually a method called plus that's defined on the integer class. So even the most basic things in Ruby are objects. So what I was doing all of that to show you is that we can do something like this. We can, instead of calling plus in the sort of conventional way, what we can do is say .send, and then we want to send the plus message to the number 1, and this is the same thing. So basically whenever you call a method on an object, you're really sending it a message, and so we're sending the message plus to this number with the argument this number. So the reason I'm showing you all of that is because what I want to do here is a little bit of magic, and it's going to be send condition hash dot key, and then I want to say equality. I think we'll do equals for now, and then we'll do condition hash dot value. Let's see what we can do here. So now let me open all this back up. Rentals, require rentals, rentals dot new, rentals dot where, what did I put in the thing? Where floor is 5. Undefined method variable rentals. Rentals new, rentals equals underscore. The wrong number of arguments given. Oh, it's because I need to make it an actual hash here. I think. I hope. No, something else went wrong. What went wrong? Okay, so let's play around with this on an individual basis. So if I go rental equals rentals dot last, I'm going to have the last method first. Okay, so we have a rental. If we do rental, let me move this up so that I can see this code a little bit. So if I do rental dot send, let me actually cycle up really quick and say this is my condition hash equals that, and then we'll do rental dot send condition hash dot key. Okay, so that's where the problem is. Condition hash dot key. Oh, it's got keys, and I only have one. Okay, that's my bad. I forgot. There's only one key, so we're expecting there to only be one key, I guess, for now. Well, what we could do is actually loop through them, and that would let us. That's actually cool. So, okay, what we can do here is say, oh boy. So we're going to get a little bit more advanced just right off the bat here. So what we'll do is say condition hash dot keys dot each do key. Well, here's what we'll do. Condition hash dot each do key value. And actually what we're going to do is say dot all. So we're making a query here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for the conditions that are passed in, and actually I'm just going to change this to be conditions so it's a little more straightforward. So conditions dot all, and then do key value, and then rental send key equals value. And so what's going to happen here is we're going to find all where all the conditions are met. It's basically what this is saying, I think. So let's do this all one more time and let's see what happens here. So I gotta quit cycling for trying to find my stuff. Okay, rentals.new, rentals equals underscore, and then let's do rentals.where, and floor. Let's try without let's try without the curly braces and see what happens. So where floors 5.count, and we get 390, and that's what we saw earlier. Let's try floor is 5 and submarket is all midtown. I may need the curly braces for this, but I'm gonna try it without it and just see what happens. Okay, so look at that. So we can now compose queries, which is kind of slick. But let's take a look at what those are. So now, if I do .class right here, this is an array. Now, what I want to do is define stats methods here. So what I want to be able to do is say, like, what's the average price? So I want to be able to put together a query and then say, what's the average price? And in order for me to do that, what I need to be able to do is get back a list of rentals, like in the actual rental class, because that's where the method is going to be. So it's not good enough for me to just get back an array. So this method here needs to return back a list of like an actual rentals object. So let's look at how we can do that next. Okay, so let's jump back to the code. And one thing I want to say really fast just while I'm here, this code, if you're brand new to Ruby, may look a little bit confusing. What you'll need to do is go look at this all method. You know, I can do like a, you know what, let's do this. Really quick example with an array. So all basically is a method sort of like find all or whatever, but it's checking for truth. So what we can do is we can say all, and then we can give it a block, give it a number, and say in dot class is, you know, let me actually do this, in dot is integer. So they're all integers. If I do is a numeric, not numeric, numeric, we get true. If I do in is greater than 1, we're going to get false. There's a sort of related one, which is any. So these are really handy methods to know. So we can check if anything is greater than 1, or if everything is greater than 1, or whatever. This is slightly different than what we're doing over here, because this is actually a hash, and so we have to check the key value thing. But I'm not going to go too much deeper into that here, but just know that that's where you need to go look, is on how does hash implement this all method or whatever. So anyway, okay, so what we can do here is just say results equals, right? And then what I would like to be able to do is say rentals.new results. Now the problem with that is we're looking at, if we look at initialize up here, it doesn't take anything as an argument, so we can't really do this. So let's just modify this to say rentals equals nil. And then what we can do here is say if rentals is nil, let's do this, else at rentals equals rentals. Okay, so we're going to kick off our top level. The first time we run rentals, it's going to be blank, right? So this is setting a default object, or sorry, a default argument. So when we say rentals equals nil, that means we can call initialize with no arguments. And if there's no arguments provided, it's just going to say there's no rentals, it's nil. If we take this away and we run it with no arguments, it's going to say, hey, there's not enough arguments. But with this default here, it's fine. So this lets us say if there's no rentals, create all the rentals. So this is what's going to happen the first time. And then for all of these sub times, we're going to have this. So let's quit out of this. Let's IRB back. Let's require rentals again. And then let's do rentals.new. And that still works. So we'll say rentals equals that. And let's take a look really quick at the rentals class. Actually, so it's a rentals object, obviously. Let's take a look at the object ID here. So that's the object ID in memory of our current rentals object. So now let's cycle back up really quick. How far up do we need to go? Rentals.where blah blah blah. Okay, now let's check the class of this thing. So now it's a rentals class, and let's check the object ID. And let's check the object ID of rentals, and you can see there that they are not the same. So this is a new rentals object which contains only the new data. So now we can do, and it's probably actually going to create a new one every time we call this, which is interesting. So there's only 40 rentals in this rentals object, but our regular rentals is going to have 5,000. So this is pretty slick. So back over in the code, let's go ahead and define our average rent method. So what I would like to be able to do is perform a query, and then at the tail end I want to check what the average rent for that query range is. So let's go over here and write a method, and we'll call it average rent. And what we would need to do is say rental. So first of all, let's get an array of rents, right? And we're going to say rents equals rentals dot map, and we can say rent. And so we have a rent attribute, right? So in our rental, we have this rent, and that's going to be a string, but it's going to represent the rent. Or maybe it's more clear to say that it represents the price of the rent. So what we need to do now is convert that into floating point numbers for each. So this will get us the array of rents that we want. Rents, I feel like I'm having a hard time making that word enunciate correctly. And then we're going to map over each of those rents, and we're going to turn those into floating point numbers. So now we just need to get the average from a list of floating point numbers. So what we can do basically is say, well, let's do it on 2 lines. So what we can do is say total rent equals rents.reduce, and this is another one of those methods that you'll have to look up. It's an array method, or an enumerable method rather. But essentially this is just going to sum all of those rents. And what we can do now is say total rent divided by rents.count. So that's going to give us the average rent. And I really just want to round this to the, I guess we can do to the 2. So it's in dollars and cents, right? So let's go back over here and let's quit out of this, and let's open it back up and play around and see what happens. So if we require rentals, then we say rentals.new rentals equals underscore, and then we say rentals.average rent. Let's see if we have any issues. So it's telling us that the average rent is $4,536. and 92 cents. And that seems very high, but I don't know that it is. Let's check on, let's check what the NYC average rent is. Average rent in Manhattan, it seems like the 4,600 might be a little bit high actually. Average rent is 4,200 in Manhattan. This may also have to do with the fact that some places aren't listed on Streeteasy. Let's look at what's the rentals.first, so we can look at what's the neighborhood, so borough. So I want to see, so let's just play around with this a little bit so we can get a sense of the what are all the boroughs by saying rentals dot map and borough, and then we can get that to be a unique list by typing dot unique like that. So let's make a query here and let's see what the rent is in Brooklyn. So rentals dot what was it, where, and then we can do borough is Brooklyn, and then we can do average rent. So this is significantly lower, 3,300. And then Queens, let's check, it's 2,500. And then let's check Manhattan. So that Manhattan's bound to be quite a bit higher. And I'm guessing that the average is here, yeah, so 5,138. I'm guessing that the data set is skewed a bit higher because this is probably not it's probably not as all-encompassing as like a government data set from New York City or whatever that might be provided via Google. This is specifically related to Streeteasy and their internal data, I imagine. And it's also a couple years old, so that might account for the discrepancy. But in any case, I mean, like, this is quite cool. Let's look again at the first, since we've done all this work, let's play around with it just a little bit. So we've got minutes to subway. I mean, what would be interesting, I mean, so I guess this is what was going on with Codecademy. You know, they're basically doing a data analysis class around this. So it's kind of interesting. I might take a look at it. But let's look at this by neighborhood. So rentals dot map and neighborhood dot unique, and let's have a look at this. So what's cool about what we've built so far is we could do something like where, so we can actually query this in a fairly sophisticated way. We can say where neighborhood, if I can spell neighborhood, and we can say something like Greenwich Village, or if you're not from New York, Greenwich Village. And then maybe we can do something like bedrooms, and that's going to be like 2. And we can check the average 2-bedroom rent in Greenwich Village. And I'm getting, well, I misspelled Greenwich. Okay, that'll do it for sure. Let me just go ahead and fix that. It's I was saying Greenwich as a joke and got it screwed up. So average rent. So the average 2-bedroom rent in Greenwich Village is $9,496. What was that list of? This is kind of fascinating. What was that list of? I'm not going to scroll. That's too obnoxious to look at. Let's look at the neighborhoods again, and let's dot sort. And we can see we have Soho here. Let's check Soho. So what might be interesting would be to build out some kind of standard set of analytics on this. So 9,564. Be cool if you could be like, okay, for each size bedroom, what is the, well, it'd be interesting to say like, what is the driving factor of the price, right? So like what causes the price to go up? I think you would have to split that up by bedrooms because obviously a bigger apartment's going to be more expensive, but you know, is it the neighborhood? Is it the distance to a subway? So I guess that's what they're trying to do in this little class. So maybe I'll check that out and maybe I'll make some more videos about that. But I think that's about it for this episode. if you like this, this is kind of a new thing that I'm doing. I'm going to be doing these like hour of Ruby kind of videos, probably every week, like once a week or something. So if you like this sort of thing, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up. If you've got anything in particular that you would like me to look at, leave a comment and I'll try to see what I can get to. Also, I kind of did all this on the fly right here, so if you find any issues or anything, or if I find any issues, I'll report back in the next video. But if you find any issues, definitely leave a comment. I read all the comments, and I'll give you a shout out in a video and say you found something that was a problem and we fixed it here. So anyway, I hope this was interesting. With all that said, I will talk to you in the next episode.